I was drawn, so because of today, I read a verse out of Psalm 127 this morning. I was drawn to Psalm 127. I just want to say a little bit about that. So we'll read that first, and then I've got just some stuff. I'm going to try and be as quick as I can, because we all want cake. Psalm 127. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate." So I want to unpack this psalm in two halves. I'll spend longer on the first half, so don't panic, all right? Where the second half will be a lot shorter. This psalm was written by King Solomon, a king known for his wisdom, but he was also the king that built the temple in Jerusalem. The temple that his father had designed. Some of those designs had come straight from God, but he provided all the materials that were all ready and waiting, and it was Solomon's wonderful opportunity then to build the temple that his father couldn't build. But we're going to start at the beginning of this. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build labor in vain." And I want to ask, what is the building? What is the building? For Solomon, he was building a temple, a house for God. But he was also building, in a way, his own house. And I think this psalm is talking about his own house, if you like, his own sense of family heritage, picking up from his father David, King David, probably the most well-known of the kings of Israel, or Judea, really. Solomon following and after him. And but what is this? What is this house? We at LifeSpring Church are also building a temple. It's not a temple made of stone and wood. It's a temple built out of our human lives. Peter says that we're being built into living stones, being built into a temple. So, we sometimes call our church this house. This house stands for this. That's what we're building. But we're all building, we have our families, we have our homes, we have our heritage, if you like. How are we doing it? You see, how we build is really important. Are we doing it with care? Are we being intentional about it? And we could argue that for the church, but we could argue it for our own family lives. How are we building it? Are we doing that with care? Are we thoughtful about how we're laying down the foundations and then building upon it? Solomon was a king, and his first concern was actually for the nation. And he famously asked God for wisdom so that he could rule with wisdom. That was his concern. So even unless the Lord builds the house, unless the Lord builds Israel as it was then, those who build it labor in vain. I'm not one for commenting on political stuff. But there's something slightly unsettling going on, I feel, in this land at this moment. So I'm hoping this is wisdom, and I'm not going to offend anyone. I'm not here to offend. That's not the point. But something is happening in this country that's good, I feel, from my perspective. That is, the church is growing. For years we're going, oh, the church is on this decline and it's just keep getting smaller. But no, the church is growing, and it's largely growing through people in their 20s and 30s. That's where the largest growth is coming from. And I'm, as a church pastor, am excited by that. You can probably understand and forgive me for being excited that something is happening with younger people where they're going, there's something here and I want in. But there's also something very unsettling happening alongside that. There's a political adoption of Christian values, if you like, a Christian heritage. They're saying we're owning this Christian heritage, and that's what makes us distinctively British. And they're using this divisively. Maybe you've not seen it, but it's happening. People are saying, I'm owning some of this Christianity, the values, the stuff that's going on, that's created where we've come from, our heritage. So they want to own that heritage, but they're not actually living in relationship with Jesus. And what it's doing is it's creating, and we've seen it in America, where there's been a kind of militancy about what being a Christian is, that becomes divisive. Christianity, I love the fact that LifeSpring Church has a diversity of nations. I love that. For me, that is so awesome. It's right in our heritage, right from the beginning. When we started, there were people from many nations in this church. And, we haven't worked out yet how to be truly multicultural, which means that those nations are informing what we look like and what we do. And I want that to happen. I want, but I embrace the nations. We are not about division in this church. Sorry, this seems to have got off track, but honestly, this is what it means to build a house. And we have to understand, well, what are the issues that we're facing? What are the things happening? And, I said earlier, I feel for the young generations, because there's so much written in social media that is intended to elicit a response. That's why it's there. It wants an emotional response. It's poking you. I want to ask, how much attention can we give to the commentators of this age, to the social media? How are we preparing? This is about children, bringing up children. How are we preparing our children in this age to discern from truth and half-truth? Because when something is used emotively, particularly to bring division, it's usually a half-truth. There's something there, but it's used it in such a way that it then brings division amongst people. Sorry, as I say, I don't normally get political. I've got it off my chest. But how are we building our houses? How are we doing that? Are we preparing our young people? Someone says, unless the Lord builds the house, God's design is perfect. The temple had some very precise instructions about key elements, largely about organization, actually, the purpose, if you like. This is what its purpose is, and this is how these elements will serve that purpose. And that's what we do when we build a house. We go, well, we need a space for this, and we need a space for that. And if you like, you sometimes, that organization comes above the aesthetic, although actually the temple in Jerusalem was beautiful. And that's actually what happens when you get the form right, the beauty is there as well. The Bible's very clear. If we lack wisdom, we're to ask God, who gives generously. You know, and I've explained before that I experienced that as a software engineer, where just that I couldn't get an answer. It was just like, I have no idea what's going on inside this chip. We designed the chip, but we still don't know what's going on. You know, something's going wrong. And I'd ask God, and he'd give me amazing insights that are just not humanly possible. It's like, okay, we've got that. He gives wisdom. It's like, for me, it works different for different people, but for me, it's like a thought, is like a little butterfly that flutters through my head. And if I don't kind of pay attention to it, it's gone. But God just plants things in my head sometimes and go, oh, is that you, Lord? Is that what you're saying? But we, being wise, we then can teach our children to be wise. A few chapters earlier in Psalm 11, the writer says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom. The word fear here, it kind of means reverence. It means that you honor God. I talked last week about putting God first. If we know that there's a God, if we know that he's sovereign, one of the songs we sang says, God is still in control. I never use that word to talk about God. I say God is sovereign. Maybe it's me and you can tell me I'm a heretic, but for me, God is in control in the same way as I was in control of my households with 2 children under 5. I was in control of that house. But there's still free will. So, yes, God is in control. I say God is sovereign. He is sovereign, knowing that. Unless the Lord watches over the... Oh, no, it was there. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Solomon was responsible for the security of the city. We've kind of talked about that, or I have really, being wise for our children's sake, being wise for our church's sake, the safety of our homes. We can do everything that's humanly possible, but that's actually knowing God. It's in that wisdom that comes from God that there's that safety, that protection. The young people that are finding Jesus at this time are also finding that there is a Father God. And that, we can get so mixed up in our own experience of what a father is that, he is a good father. Father means the one who protects, the one who provides. And that's, the watchman needs to know there's a father. If you're the leader of the household, as it were, you're the watchman. But actually, no, there's God as well. There's Father God. So I'm going to move on. There is an enemy, you see. The enemy comes to steal, to kill and destroy. That's why our young people need to know the wisdom of God in their lives. So much depression, incredible amount of depression amongst young people. I think I've said all that. It is vain that you rise up early and go to late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives his beloved sleep. Now, Solomon doesn't have a problem with getting up early, because elsewhere in the Proverbs he actually praises those who get up early. And I don't think it's because there's somebody next door disturbing his sleep. He lived in a temple, a castle or whatever it was. This is really a continuation of the same thought. It's so easy to get caught up in anxiety. And Some of the men here might understand this, but I want to fix things. It's just like, I'm an engineer. I just want to fix things. But that nervous energy, if you like, that it eats at our subconscious. We can keep rehearsing the what ifs and the if only I'd done that differently and all that stuff. This is what he's talking about. He's saying, there's no point to all of that. So this nervous energy that I've got to get up late, and I get up early and I'm staying up late because I've just got to get it done. And saying, no, well, unless the Lord builds the house. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden light." Whether it's our family, our home, whether it's our security, the watchman, or whether it's our livelihood, our toil, these verses are saying, if you put God in the right place, then it just comes together. And Jesus said, "My yoke is easy." We're not, we still work. We're still in a yoke. We've still got work to do. But he's saying, "I'm coming alongside you." And he's like it's the image of the big cattle that they used to use for ploughing, and the big shoulders of those, and Jesus is, and there are we in the little side of this yoke, and actually we're not doing much. But he's there with us, pulling the weight. Some of you know that Bridget and I were at a conference last week, and there's a worship leader called Tim Hughes who was speaking there. I can't remember if I said any of this last week, but he spoke from the prophet of Amos, that last chapter where it talks about, I will raise up the tabernacle of David. And then after that, it goes on to talk about how the reaper will overtake the sower. There's this image of such abundance. But it starts with, I'm going to raise up this tabernacle of David. And he kind of stepped us through what God was saying. What is this tabernacle of David? The thing is, when David became king, his greatest desire was to bring the Ark of the Covenant. You know what the Ark of the Covenant is. You've all seen Indiana Jones. But the Ark of the Covenant, it represented the presence of God. And King David said, we need that in Jerusalem. We need it here. We need the presence of God right where we are now. And so almost like as his first act as king, he brings, it takes him 2 attempts, but he brings the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And every 7 steps or something, they're sacrificing bullocks and goodness knows what. It must have been real messy. But he did it in utter commitment. And then once it's there, he creates what's called a tabernacle. It was basically a gazebo. It was like an open thing, and the Ark of the Covenant but was in there. But then it was surrounded by the priests and the Levites. And he appointed, I think it was 400,000 Levites and priests to worship 24/7 around this Ark of the Covenant. And somebody had done the mathematics that he was spending the equivalent in today's money of £3 million a month on worship. That was his commitment. He had armies to build. He had just become king. He was just become king. He knew there was still problems that the army needed to deal with. There was the poor that needed looking after. There was, making sure that the fields were planted and the olive groves. There was lots he had to do, but his first priority was, right, we're going to invest in worship. That is my number one. And he, spent huge sums of money on worship because he was committed to it. And, David's kingdom just grew. It became this, they were so wealthy. Just everything came right for King David. Well, mostly. He had some trips along the way, didn't he? But something about putting it first. And God's saying, God in Amos, that prophet is saying, God, I'm going to do this again. He says, I'm going to raise up the tabernacle of David. This emphasis, this focus on who God is, putting him first, is going to transform people's lives and experience of him. That kind of makes sense. So I just want to wrap up with this. Children are heritage from the Lord. I think kind of things have changed since, in the time that Solomon wrote this. It talks about he shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. The gates of Jerusalem were the place where you went, where you would meet with wise people who could deal with disputes. It was always done in the gate. So you'd go to the gate and you'd have your dispute. You'd be there, you'd have your opponent or enemy, it says there, next to you, and you would put forward your cases and there would be a judgment made. And the message here really is that in having many children, it kind of boosts your stature as a man, if you like, going to the gate. It's like, we're not going to argue with this guy. He's got 15 sons and they're all as big as a house. I think it means something different to us today. But I think it is still about heritage. It's about, because actually some of you may not even have children of your own. And you're going, well, what's this got to do with me? This is kind of uncomfortable. But actually, God actually intends a heritage for everyone. It's not necessarily about children. It's not literally has to be the fruit of the womb. It's something God made you for. And we had that prayed this morning, that that little lad's made for something. We hear it all the time, you can be whatever you want to be. Actually, the Bible doesn't agree with that. What it says is that you are no accident. There's nobody in this world that's an accident. You were all known by God before you even were in the womb. God saw you, and God loved you. But more than that, he made you for a purpose. And that purpose actually on this earth is not always, the earthly purpose, if you like, is not always as important as the journey. Because we tend to want to kind of like, I'm going to do this. And that's our objective and we're going for it. But it's actually what happens along the way that is actually what God often is more interested in. The journey. The journey is preparing us for eternity. Again, I spoke about this last week a little bit, talking about authority. That we are made for eternity. That's where our true heritage lies. I don't know what your image of eternity is. The image of sitting around on clouds isn't something you find in the Bible. I don't know where that's come from. Eternity is being with Christ. There'll be relationship. God is a creative God, so there's going to be creativity. There'll be celebration, there'll be music, there'll be a new earth, there'll be new responsibilities of care and nurture. Eternity is going to bring challenges and opportunities, but there will be work in eternity, but it'll be utterly rewarding and utterly joyous. It's what it is. Yes, I'd like to leave an earthly heritage in my sons. But actually, more importantly, I want to lay up treasures in heaven. I want to be ready for when I get there, or the new earth. It's the same thing. When I get there, I want to be ready so I can run the race there that he has called me to. That's the heritage I'm looking for. This is a message of Psalm is kind of one of warning, but it's also one of hope for the future, a new temple, a new opportunity to engage with God, but getting the foundations right with the family, right with the house, whatever it is. This morning might be the beginning of a new season in your life. This world is full of anxiety, it's full of division. The message here is that if you get the foundations right, then you're lifted above all of these things. There's actually opportunity to be free from anxiety. My yoke, Jesus said, is easy and my burden is light. Yes, we still pull a plough, but we're no longer doing it alone. He's alongside us. Last week, as I spoke about authority. You can find that on our YouTube channel. But in that, I spoke about how true authority is now in Jesus. It's up here every week. This verse from Matthew 28. All authority is given. And that authority is given to nurture, to protect, and to bring healing to this world. That's kind of right where this psalm is. To enable us to live holy, joyful lives. However difficult, however painful our circumstances may be, God gives us joy. Right, I'm going to end there. Thank you for your patience. You've been immensely patient.